In this video, we're going to be talking about the different types of white blood cells and how they develop into these white blood cells, and also their important characteristics. So we're first going to start at the very beginning. This over here is a hematopoietic stem cell. The hematopoietic stem cell is created in the bone marrow. By being created in the bone marrow, it can go one of two ways, either the myeloid lineage or the lymphoid lineage. I'm going to be starting off with the myeloid lineage. The myeloid lineage, if we go into the myeloid lineage, it then develops into a myeloid stem cell. By developing into a myeloid stem cell, based on the different protein reactions happening inside the cell, it can choose one of three ways. One of that being a red blood cell, a platelet, or a white blood cell. Now, if it becomes a red blood cell, it does not have a nucleus, and its main function is to carry oxygen to other parts of the body. This is that it lives a much more longer life, up to 120 days. If it becomes a platelet, its main goal is to clot blood and make sure infection does not enter the blood so quickly. If it becomes a white blood cell, it defends the entire body and it becomes part of the immune system. Now that I just explained what these two are, we're going to be talking about the white blood cell, since it's much more complicated in this diagram. Once we go into the white blood cell, this myeloid stem cell develops into a myeloblast. Then it develops into a granulocyte, or it can go into a monocyte. So first, let's talk about what granulocytes are. So granulocytes include neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, and mast cells. The difference these four cells have compared to the rest is that they have these small granules inside of them, and these granules are important in protecting the body. When these four cells recognize an external threat, such as a pathogen or bad bacteria, it eats the bacteria using a process called phagocytosis. By using phagocytosis, once it ingests the bacteria inside, what happens is, using the granules, it breaks down that bacteria so that the bacteria or the infection does not spread over. Hence, these are called granulocytes. However, it doesn't have to be a granulocyte if it matures into a monocyte. And these monocytes mature into a dendritic cell or a macrophage cell. Now, a macrophage cell and dendritic cell also use the same process, phagocytosis, to be able to eat the bacteria. However, a macrophage develops cytokines. These cytokines lure the bad bacteria into basically a kill box, where the macrophages, and later, as we're going to talk about, the T cells, basically kill and use phagocytosis to break down any of the bacteria. It's basically a luring technique. So, a difference between the dendritic cell and the macrophage is the dendritic cell, after the phagocytosis process, it takes the remains of that bacteria and puts it around the shell or its outermost membrane. And putting it in its outermost membrane, these small remaining parts of the bacteria, which are called antigens, are then sent to a memory T cell, where it marks that same thing down for further research, and in case of that same bacteria comes again, it's able to deal with it faster. This basically links the innate and adaptive response in the myeloid lineage. So all of these cells, except for the dendritic cell, mainly use the innate response. The innate response basically means it doesn't matter, or it doesn't exactly check if that cell or bacteria is bad or not. If it sees it as a threat, it will kill it. However, the dendritic cell, after killing it, it sends it to a memory T cell, and the memory T cell mainly identifies if it's a good or bad cell. So this links the innate response system and the adaptive response system. Before I go into the lymphoid lineage, we have to talk about what these four different granulocytes are. The neutrophil is the most common one, and the neutrophil mainly helps in fighting the bacteria. Eosinophil is mainly used in cases of inflammation, and basophil and mast cells are used in cases of allergies. So after identifying these four different granulocytes, we're now moving on to the lymphoid lineage. So just like it started off with, instead of being the myeloid stem cell, it's going to turn the hematopoietic cell can turn into a lymphoid stem cell, based on obviously the proteins, the chemical changes in the proteins that's happening inside the cell. Then it can evolve, or it can develop into a lymphoblast, which can then mature into a large granular lymphocyte or a small lymphocyte. Now, this large lymphocyte is mainly a natural killer. This natural killer also uses an innate response system like all the other cells over here, except maybe the dendritic cell. Now, the natural killer cell doesn't exactly care doesn't exactly consider if it's a good or bad cell. If it just sees it as a threat, then it'll go after it. And this also goes in a much more broader term. So whatever pathogen or whatever bacteria it is, if it sees it as a threat, it will kill it. Hence the name natural killer. However, it can also go another way, a small lymphocyte, which then matures into a B cell and T cell. The B cell creates plasma cells, which create antibodies. The antibodies are basically used for marking these bad bacteria, and what happens is by marking it, it stops the bacteria from entering into cells or organs where it can survive and be able to reproduce rapidly. However, by marking it with the antigens, it tells the fighting T cells and the macrophages to go after this particular cell and stopping it from rapidly reproducing in other areas. Hence, antibodies are really important, and that's actually how vaccines work. By inserting the vaccine is basically full of antibodies, and by inserting it into our skin via like our bloodline, it's then the memory T cells are able to understand or learn what those antibodies are and put it into its logbook. And through that, if that same virus ever comes again, then the memory T cells will know how to respond to it, and the macrophages and the fighting T cells will be able to deal with it most effectively. Now, there's also another one, the T cell. The T cell can go into the cytotoxic T cell or the T helper cell. The T helper cell regulates the T cells and also splits into a memory cell, but we didn't put it here. Now, the memory cell, like I just said, is used for memorizing all of the other, is basically used for memorizing all the bacteria or all the infections that the person faced and keeps a note of it. So if the same bacteria enters the body again, it knows how to respond to it most efficiently. This part over here, or this section, is known as the adaptive response system in the lymphoid lineage. And the reason why is because it's able to adapt and is able to update its notes on these bacteria every single time. And unlike having a broader view like the natural killer, which just kills like any kind of pathogen or any kind of bacteria that sees as a threat, it goes after a specific pathogen or a specific threat and makes notes on the specific threats. So now we're going to be moving at the cytotoxic T cells, which are really deadly T cells. This happens if the person's like in really big danger and they need like these T cells to fight off large amounts of bacteria at the same time. Then the cytotoxic T cell is created. But this is only in like cases of emergencies. And the same thing over here, the helper T cells also creates these cytokines. And like I said earlier, the cytokines lure these bad bacteria into an area where the macrophages and the T cells are able to kill it off in a certain area. All right. So this is all about the different types of white blood cells and how they respond to bad bacteria efficiently. And we also mentioned about innate response system and adaptive response system in our body.